How long, realistically, do you think he'll be able to keep that up?
Well, that's the big question, right? You know, in America, we have the presumption of innocence before being proven guilty, but there is no due process in the court of public opinion. He's in real trouble. This is, you know, when the U.S. government and the U.S. attorneys bring an action, they usually have it locked up. They care about their win-loss rate very much. So I think he is in a lot of jeopardy. He has an election year coming up next year, so I suspect he's going to try and hold on as long as he can throughout that process. Is he going to? I think there's going to be a little bit of a grace period as some of the political folks take a look at, you know, how bad the indictment is and whether he really has a chance to prove his innocence. But you're now reading that, you know, the city controller just is calling him to step down. The governor has acknowledged that she's looking into her authority to remove him, and that's happening fairly quickly, you know, more quickly than usual. And I think his real problem, I call it the Governor Cuomo problem. New York City is already out of control because of mismanagement. How is he going to be able to govern a somewhat ungovernable city while he's fighting these federal charges? One of the things that got Governor Cuomo was that he just had too many fronts, right? He couldn't do his day job of running the state. And, you know, Eric Adams is really going to fail New Yorkers moving forward if he's got to deal with defending himself against this case and also, you know, governing the city and managing the city.
Chapin, what do you think might be happening behind the scenes? Sort of in the same way as we saw at the White House when Joe Biden, after his disastrous debate performance, had to decide whether or not to stay in the race, and ultimately he decided to drop out. What do you think is happening in the Adams camp right now as they size up this challenge of running a very big and, as you say, almost ungovernable city as he is facing criminal charges?
Well, everyone is in crisis mode, right? You know, I do crisis communications for a living, too, and the instinct is to, you know, the employee's instinct and people in City Hall's instinct is to dive under the desk and hope that the hurricane passes, which it never does. You've seen resignations over the past couple of days and weeks. You've seen other indictments. You've seen other investigations being launched. It's a huge mess inside City Hall, which is one of the reasons this is going to become unmanageable and spiral out of control. You know, he just had a cabinet member have to resign because he's under federal investigation. So I think you're going to see some, you know, rats jump from a sinking ship. And you're also going to see the proactive, you know, the mayor had a press conference today with his supporters and allies surrounding him. He's working a surrogate program. He's going to have his surrogates out there talking to the media, defending him, talking about presumed innocent until proven guilty, and supporting, you know, his record and his life of service. Yeah. However, his record, you know, as a Republican consultant, I will tell you, is not that great. You know, the city is a little bit running out of control compared to some of his predecessors.
Well, and Chapin, of course, at the end of the day, this isn't just about Eric Adams. It's about the impact that could ripple around not just New York City, but some of the counties surrounding it. Think Westchester or Long Island, areas in which there are competitive House districts in play this cycle. Speaking as a Republican, Chapin, what does this do to the odds of Republicans being able to keep hold of those seats in some of these areas and districts Biden won in 2020?
Well, when you try and tag a politician that is not necessarily related or affiliated with another one, it's sort of a bank shot in politics, but it will certainly be used as a cudgel, and particularly in some of these close races. You're going to start seeing, if we haven't already today, some of these candidates in tough races the Democrats start distancing themselves from the mayor just to nip that in the bud. If I was advising them, I would say, you know, call on him to resign and move on, right? We don't want to be talking about Democrat corruption in New York. And I would add, you know, this is really a result of one-party rule, right? This is what happens when you have one-party rule. Almost the entire city, from local to federal, is controlled by Democrats, and there's no check on the power. You know, there's no, you know, Alvin Bragg is a progressive DA. You notice that he didn't announce any investigations of the mayor, right? So I do think, you know, this is because there isn't a check on the power, particularly in New York City, of a one-party rule Democrat city.
Speaking of check on power, how do you think the vetting process by the party ahead of the mayoral election allowed this to somehow go unnoticed? The indictment says this goes back almost a decade. So how did some of these sorts of activities and transactions somehow escape the net of a political party doing screening and vetting of its candidates?
Well, to your point, there have been rumors dogging the mayor from his borough presidency to when he was in the state senate. So this isn't all that shocking, particularly when it comes to the trips. There have always been rumors about that. But I would say that he needs to really distance himself, really make proactive moves. I think he needs to fire some people. I think he needs to proactively start to talk about his record to the extent there is one and the positive nature of it. He really needs a huge push right now. I have been saying this actually for a while, especially when the investigation started. He really needs to act like a mayor. He's right now acting like a defendant or a target of an investigation. He needs to show that the city of New York is being governed and he is in charge. That is one significant thing he needs to do. And I haven't seen him do that in his mayoralty. It seems like he sort of doesn't have a vision, right? Rudy had a vision. Bloomberg had a vision. De Blasio had a vision. All their cabinets, agency heads were tasked with executing that vision. I don't see it out of Mayor Adams. I feel like he's lurching from crisis to crisis, which is, this is the biggest one so far, and it's really going to get him beat because he doesn't really have a hard and fast plan. I mean, he did have the press conference, but he really needs to be out there looking like he's managing the city.